About 3 months ago, we went down to Austin, Minnesota, right on the Iowa border, and we asked a group of kindergartners to put into words and on film a synthesis of some of what our research has said at a very interpersonal level makes a big difference in kids' lives. The question we posed was, how can adults show you that they care?
Notice me and smile. Ask me about myself. Be honest with me. Empower me. Ask me to help. Make time for me. Surprise me. Surprise me. Believe in me. Show up at my games. Listen to me. Respect my choices. Help me make decisions. Listen to my stories. Read to me. Read to me. Read to me. Catch me doing something right. Let me act my age. Be silly with me. Tell me a joke. Play with me. Help me be my best. Share a meal with me. Build something with me. Be happy. Ask for my opinion. Visit my school. Trust me. Expect the best.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how we try and put into very plain language terms that kids understand and kids can use what the research is telling us about education and youth development. I'm an optimist. I've been working for about 25 years in education in various fields, and I think that when we think about the kids that are in our schools, or as Sharon really described, I think in very compelling terms, that are very young but about to enter in our schools, they're coming into a system where actually, despite a lot of what I think you hear in the popular press, a lot of pieces of a puzzle are starting to come into place. After a lot of fits and starts and reversals of course, we're starting to invest in early childhood, slowly but surely. We're starting to raise academic standards so all kids have got clear and high expectations. We're emphasizing post-secondary education for all kids, not just some kids. We're investing in technology. We're thinking more honestly about race and culture. We're doing not just more testing, but better testing. We're beginning to think about involving families in the process. We're aligning supports through things like the Northside Achievement Zone and Generation Next. We're finally seeing out-of-school time as a resource, given that kids will spend a total of 15% of their lives in school during their K through 12 years. And we're beginning to actually treat teaching like a profession, with professional development and using data to make decisions. 20 years ago, in my second year of teaching in a major American high school, I was put in charge of the staff development committee, not showing you that treating the development of our educators was a really high priority. But there's still some big missing pieces. I think as the last presentation highlighted, a lot of those missing pieces lie beyond schools in the living situations that our kids are experiencing. The reason I say it's pretty clear that we're missing some pieces is because the data makes it pretty unavoidable. This is what, on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the nation's report card, this is what high school achievement looks like since the mid-1980s when I was in St. Paul Public Schools. That's what it looks like in reading. That's what it looks like in mathematics. Very disconcertingly, in recent years, we also haven't been making much progress on the gaps between groups of kids. Despite the fact that all the way through the early 1990s, we made good progress in closing the gaps between Latino students and African American students and white kids in reading, the gaps have not narrowed in recent years. Same thing, unfortunately, is true in mathematics. Now, there has been progress at the elementary and middle school levels, but ultimately, this is the point that matters most, because the end of high school is the jumping off point and the end of compulsory education. And so if we're not getting it done there, it's pretty difficult to feel like we're getting it done. So what's missing? For the purposes of our discussion here today, I should say I'm obviously oversimplifying a lot of very complex factors that we could have a really interesting discussion about for a very long time. But to make the point kind of simple, I thought I'd go back to the old idea of supply and demand, if you remember that from Economics 101. And the basic idea there is that if you increase the supply of something but demand does not exist to take advantage of that supply, you're going to be out of balance, and you're not going to get the price that you're going to want, and the system's not going to work. I think there's a strong reason to think that for the last couple decades in education, we've been increasing what you might call the supply of challenging education. We've been doing all of those other things that I put on the puzzle piece, which certainly goes beyond standardized testing to include a lot of really interesting ways of increasing opportunities and supports for kids. But what I think is missing has been a similar and corresponding emphasis on increasing the demand on the part of kids for succeeding in the increased and enhanced educational opportunities that for the last couple of decades and for a lot of money we've been working to provide for them. One statistic that could be replicated across many other fields of education, but high school dropout is probably the most cataclysmic thing that can happen to a young person in our society. Making it and living a stable life without a high school diploma is extraordinarily difficult today. And in one of the most effective major studies that has happened of high school dropouts, where we actually did something radical and went out and asked the dropouts why they dropped out, the fact that school neither motivated nor inspired them was an overwhelming finding. So, what do we do about that issue? The basic thesis of this short presentation is we've got to accept that some kids don't come with batteries included for school. And that in fact, and I've been a classroom teacher with 180 kids on a high school course load, we can sit around and wish they did, or blame their families, or blame the curriculum, or blame the structure of the school day, or we can try and creatively look at some new insights that are coming from research to say, how do we increase young people's capacity to succeed in school, persevering through distractions and difficulty that often are getting in the way? There's an exploding body of research in developmental psychology, behavioral economics, and other aspects of the behavioral sciences that's showing that all of us have what you might call tapes playing in our heads. We have preconceptions about who we are as learners, about what school means, about what work means, about whether we're likely to succeed or fail. And what the research is showing is that these tapes that we have playing in our heads have big implications for how hard we work to learn something, how much we're willing to take risks, how much we're willing to learn from failure, and all of that translates into significant changes in outcomes educationally. So, if we took a page from other fields, I picked Target here for homegrown purposes. I did this before the Target was in the news, as they've been recently. But I will tell you actually, and some of you may actually work in this field, the degree to which the worlds of retail, the consumer industry more broadly, spend millions and billions of dollars synthesizing research done by PhDs on human emotion, human decision making, human preferences, and they apply that research to something as seemingly trivial as product placement. If you go home and you Google the research on consumer preference, you'll find that they run very sophisticated experiments just to see what kind of incremental changes you get from changing everything from display to the order of things on a web page. And they do all of that because they realize that we're all human, and ultimately it's a people business. And so the preconceptions that you bring into that Target store are going to directly influence what you buy and what you do. Healthcare is also starting to realize this. And in education, if we want to prepare all kids for success in some kind of education after high school and a career that pays a living wage, we need to start doing the same thing. So, what does that mean? I'm going to give you two quick examples tonight. Some of you may be familiar with the first one. The second one is a little less familiar. There's a psychologist at Stanford named Carol Dweck who for 25 years has been looking at the research on motivation and persistence. And she has coined the very complex research that she's done over a long period of time in the concept of mindset. And at its core, her work about mindset has found that when we look at people, generally speaking, especially as it applies to school, people fall into one of two types of mindset: a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Now, a fixed mindset is one in which you're going to see your potential, in particular your intelligence, as fixed. What I am is what I'm likely to be, and it's almost like it's in my DNA, or it's in the water, but it comes from somewhere. Whereas people with a growth mindset actually believe that they can become smarter, that their capacity can increase. if you think about it, this has big implications for how a kid is going to experience learning something new, especially something difficult. In a fixed mindset, young people agree with the premise that, yeah, you can learn more things, but you can't really change how smart you are. In a growth mindset, people believe you can always substantially change your intelligence. So what does this mean in practical terms? To take a couple of old familiar sayings, growth mindset, you might say nothing ventured, nothing gained. Whereas in a fixed mindset, nothing ventured, nothing lost. In a growth mindset, you might say, if you don't succeed, try again. In a fixed mindset, you might say, if at first you don't succeed, you probably don't have the ability. So the growth mindset is going to be the orientation toward the capacity to continually challenge yourself. And the best single way that I've discovered to encapsulate that in a phrase, and it's been at the core of a number of the really interesting experiments that Dweck and her colleagues have done for years, is to say that when you teach kids that the brain is like a muscle, and that when you challenge yourself mentally, you literally create new neural connections in your head. Just like when you work out, you physically break down the fibers in your muscle that makes you stronger. When you learn something, even if you don't get the right answer, you actually make yourself smarter. And that when kids come to believe that smart is not what you are, it's what you work to become, it has powerful implications for how many challenging problems they'll try on an assignment, how hard they'll work, and very importantly, how they will see failure. Because when they don't get the score or the grade or the opportunity they expected, a kid with a growth mindset is going to see that as an opportunity to change and get better. A kid with a fixed mindset is likely to see that as confirmation of my limited capacity. But the really hopeful thing about Dweck's research and others' research is that this is something that can be changed. This is what psychologists would call a malleable concept. And what the research has found in experiment after experiment is that when you randomly assign kids to two groups, one of whom is going to get the treatment and one is going to get the control, and you teach these kids that the brain is like a muscle in a very limited series of lessons, and you teach these kids something like a memorization technique or maybe even positive thinking, and then you teach both groups new academic content, the kids who encountered the idea that the brain is like a muscle, the kids who studied people, actually like Einstein, who failed in school but persisted and then obviously succeeded, it has powerful and sometimes almost immediate implications for their motivation and persistence in school. Here's what happened with one intervention that they did in a middle school in New York City, all low-income, predominantly African-American 7th graders, all of whom were experiencing the traditional downward trend in student achievement, here as measured by grades, that happens unfortunately in middle school. But right here at the intervention point, the kids who were in the dotted line group experienced a 6-session, half-hour each session intervention to learn that the brain is like a muscle, and smart is not what you are, it's what you work to become. And this is what happened with the trajectory for the students who encountered the idea of the growth mindset, and that's what happened to the kids who did not. It almost seems a little like magic, but it really isn't. It's tapping into those kids' tapes that they're playing in their heads and helping them reprogram the way they're thinking about learning and about themselves. So Carol Dweck is one example. And to give you one other that's not actually directly from the field of education, but that I think similarly could have powerful benefits for what we do, I thought I'd pick another body of research that attempts to look at the degree to which people take action in the present that is influenced by their visions of the future. We know for adults, and especially for adolescents, that there's a big disconnect between what we do today and what we aspire to do in the future. The research is pretty clear today that American teenagers' problem is not low aspirations. They have high hopes, higher than any of the preceding two generations in terms of the kind of education they expect after high school, the kind of college they aspire to go to. When they rank kids internationally, the one area in which American kids beat the world time after time is self-esteem. But there's this frustrating disconnect between those high aspirations for the future and the things that they're doing every day in school and in life. So what what the researchers at Stanford did, and this picture isn't as clear, but they actually did this with virtual reality technology. They did an experiment to see if you could actually impact the behavior people take in the present with an intervention that connects them in a very visceral way to the future. So here's what they did. The people walked into a virtual reality lab, they put on that helmet. This is not an experiment that we probably could replicate in any school or out-of-school time program because each of those helmets is about $50,000. But they walk into a virtual reality room, and before they did that, they scanned each of the participants. So this is actually one of the participants in the experiment that I'm talking about. That's his regular photo. They used computer modeling technology to create an avatar of that person, a computer representation, just like if you remember the movie, of what he or she looked like. This is the avatar of this actual participant in the study. They were mostly college-age students, and so this was an age exact replication of the participant in the study. But here's the catch and the relevance to the point I'm trying to make about kids and education. They also used computer technology to create a 70-year-old version of the avatar, which was pretty simple to do and accurate enough to convey the idea that that's me, but that's me at 70. So they took the participants and they again assigned them into two random groups. And here's what the intervention was. Group A walked into a room and they saw their avatar at their current age, let's say age 20, and they had a conversation with another avatar that was being controlled by someone in another room. They talked for about 15 minutes, long enough to come to associate themselves with that avatar. When I talk, he or she talks. When I move, he or she moves. And the conversation was quite routine. Questions from the other avatar, responses from the participant. That's the first group. They did that for about 15 minutes. They left the room. Group B walked in, saw a 70-year-old version of him or herself, had the exact same conversation with another avatar about exactly the same information. After both groups walked out of the virtual reality lab, they walked into a regular room and they were presented with this scenario. You've just received an unexpected additional $1,000. You can do one of four things with your $1,000. You can use it to buy something nice for someone special. You can invest it in a retirement fund. You can plan a fun and extravagant occasion, or you can put it in a checking account. Well, as you might be able to guess by the way I positioned this, the people who had seen their 70-year-old avatar put twice as much money into retirement as did the people who had seen the avatar of themselves at age 20. When they replicated the experiment and they made it a happy 70-year-old, they put more than 3 times as much money into retirement. What happened? There was an immediate identification of the current self with the present self that had implications for their behavior in the present. And pretty much anybody who's worked with kids or has kids or been a kid, I think can understand how that insight, which other studies have shown you can replicate without a $50,000 virtual reality helmet, could have big implications for the way a young person decides to experience school. So one of the things at Search Institute that we're going to be doing in the next 3 years is taking not just the bodies of research that I've mentioned here today, but many others, and attempting to build them into a set of resources that organizations that work with kids out of schools, like mentoring programs, like Boys and Girls Clubs, like YMCAs, and schools can use to take the insights from this body of research on perseverance and integrate it into what they already do. What do I mean by integrate it into what they already do? Think back to the idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset. If you're a teacher and you're working with a kid and you walk by and you see that he or she has finished the worksheet quickly and got it right, and you unthinkingly say, "Great job, you did that so fast and you got it all right," what have you unintentionally incentivized with the kid? Getting the right answer is what's most important, and doing it fast and effortlessly. As opposed to if you walk by and actually see a kid who's struggling and you say, "I really like how hard you're working on that, and I think you're using a really good strategy. How can we think differently about what you're not understanding?" The studies have shown that simply switching the way that you praise a kid can have immediate implications for how hard they work. So the process the perseverance process will actually have a bunch of different stages, only 2 of which I've talked about tonight. It'll begin with helping kids identify their spark, their intrinsic interest that motivates them to want to get up in the morning or that they care about the most. Think Forward, Act Now is closing that gap between aspiration and action. Increasing intelligence with effort is baking in that idea that smart is not what you are, it's what you work to become. We want to have every kid have a support card that's a counterpart to the report cards that kids get all the way through school, where they identify the web of support that does or doesn't exist in their lives. We want to teach them some goal management techniques that will help them keep moving through obstacles that have been shown in both kids and adults to have some really positive implications for how they deal with difficulty. We think it's critical for kids to learn to think about thinking or practice some metacognition, because when that kid starts to get panicked in the class because they're not understanding, kids who persevere through that problem know how to pull their head up 3 levels and say, wait a minute, I'm losing track, I need help. Helping kids organize life and understand that there are some kids who let life happen, some people who let life happen to them, and some people who organize life, and hopefully they're making the right choice in that, with those 2 issues. And then finally, helping young people think about investing in themselves. And the transition triumphantly is in particular because we envision this as something that could be very useful at those critical transition points when we lose a lot of kids and when kids lose a lot of momentum. In Chicago Public Schools, where we're doing some work, when the very same kids move from 8th grade to 9th grade, attendance and discipline problems more than triple in September from the previous April. And so the reality of it is those kids did not have radically different personalities come upon them over the course of that summer. They made a transition from one environment to the next, and they were ill-equipped to persist in their studies across the divide. So in the big picture, what we're hoping all of you will sort of think about is we need to add the demand side to our educational strategy. We need to think as creatively about kids' motivation and persistence as Target thinks about the motivation and persistence of people who walk in to their stores. And for any of you who actually collect a paycheck or spend a lot of time thinking about and working with kids, you're probably thinking, my God, another thing that I need to think about doing in addition to everything else that's already on the list. So I thought I'd end with one of my favorite quotes. It's Leonard Bernstein. To achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. So we hope in the years ahead at Search Institute to be able to give people who work with kids a plan for strengthening perseverance on the kids' behalf and on all of ours. Thanks.